Was a spirited one. I'm Melissa Francis. Julie is in today for Dana on the Daily Briefing, which starts right now.
A Fox News alert. President Trump vowing executive action on immigration, announcing plans to sign something this hour, ending the separation of families illegally crossing the border. Hello, everyone. I'm Julie Banderas. I'm in for Dana Perino today, and we have a lot to talk about. This is the Daily Briefing. The president revealing his plan during a meeting with Republican lawmakers. About 24 House Republicans still undecided on a compromise immigration bill, now summoned to the White House to meet with the president. This as the Attorney General and Secretary of Homeland Security visit the Hill to discuss immigration policies for those families seeking asylum. The president explaining his decision earlier.
We all very much have the same views. We want to keep family together. At the same time, we have to be strong on the border. Otherwise, you'll have millions of people coming up, not thousands like we have now. You'll have millions of people flowing up and just overtaking the country. And we're not letting that happen. So we have to be very strong on the border. But at the same time, we want to be very compassionate.
Steve Harrigan is near the Mexico border in Combs, Texas for us. But we start with Mike Emanuel, who joins us live from Capitol Hill, where lawmakers plan to vote on a pair of immigration bills tomorrow. What's that about, Mike?
Well, that's right, Julie. Senate Democrats have been appealing to President Trump, calling on him to use his pen to take executive action to deal with that family separation problem. The Senate Democratic leader does not sound very optimistic about Congress's ability to tackle immigration reform.
There's only one real solution, much as we would dream for another, and that is the president to solve this problem. Because the odds of any legislation being able to pass without poison pill riders, House, Senate, and be signed by the president is just about zero, when the percentage that the president could solve this problem if he wants to is just about 100%.
Top cabinet officials, including Attorney General Jeff Sessions and Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen, are on Capitol Hill urging lawmakers for the need to act on immigration. The focus for House Republican leaders is trying to get 218 yes votes on one of the two immigration reform plans lawmakers are expected to consider late tomorrow. GOP leaders are having about 24 undecided Republican members go down to the White House to hear directly from President Trump. For now, House GOP leaders don't want to talk about a backup plan. Their primary focus is on a bill carefully crafted by GOP leaders reflecting President Trump's immigration priorities.
This is very good compromise legislation that not only solves the child separation issue at the border, it also solves the border. It solves DACA. It solves a lot of our broken immigration parts.
This is a bill that is consensus. It's a bill that the president supports. It's a bill that can become law. We're going to have an opportunity to vote on it tomorrow night. The question will be, do people want to play politics, or do they want to put people before politics?
If they can get 218 yes votes on one of those two bills, its fate is uncertain in the Senate. Bottom line, they need 60 yes votes in the Senate, and that would need pretty significant Democrat support. Julie?
All right, Mike Emanuel on Capitol Hill, thank you. And now for the latest on this situation unfolding at our border with Mexico, let's go to Steve Harrigan. He joins us now near a crossing in Combs, Texas. Hi, Steve.
Julie, at least 2,000 children have been separated from their parents since the zero tolerance policy began to be enforced in early May. And one of the biggest questions has been what has been happening to the very youngest children. Now, there is a strict policy here of non-access for media. But as you can see behind me, the Associated Press initially reported the existence of 3 tender age shelters. These are shelters for children, unaccompanied minors, under 13 years of age. Now, the goal by Health and Human Services was to try and keep the children together close by with their parents as their parents worked their way through the legal system. We spoke a short time ago to a physician who was inside this shelter behind me. She said it was homey. There were cribs, books, toys, a kind staff. But at the same time, a very disturbing picture. She said the children, the toddlers, a room full of 15 of them, aged 1 to 3, were practically silent, that she'd never seen a room like it. No running, no moving, no crying, no jumping. These were children without her parents. She said It was just agony to be there as a pediatrician and not be able to help, with the staff not being able to pick up and comfort those children. There are plans for more of these shelters if things continue as they are going now to be created, one in Houston in a converted warehouse, but already there is local political opposition to creating more of these tender age shelters. Julie, back to you.
All right, Steve Harrigan, thank you so much. Joining us now for more on all of this, House Judiciary Committee Chairman Bob Goodlatte. Thank you very much, sir, for talking to us. A very hectic and busy time, but a lot to get done nonetheless.
Julie, it's great to be with you and your viewers.
Thanks for being with us. You are leading one of the two bills that we're talking about right now that are being considered by the House. Secretary Nielsen will be urging the president today to throw his full support behind your bill and also the compromise bills in the House. Let's talk about your bill.
Julie, first, to be clear, both bills are my bills. I was the original introducer of both pieces of legislation. One's called Goodlatte number 1 and the other Goodlatte number 2. I'm for both of them, but I'm especially for a bill that gets 218 votes and can move over to the Senate, because we've got to address these problems.
Let's talk about the likelihood of getting those votes, because in the bill, which includes the same 4 pillars President Trump asked for back in February, which failed to pass, the question is, how is this bill you are proposing, or 2 bills that you're proposing, than the bill then, which ultimately failed, any different, and does it prevent the separation of families?
Yes, so Goodlatte number 1, a bill I introduced along with the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, Mike McCall, and Raul Labrador and Martha McSally. It is a strong enforcement bill that also addresses the DACA population. The new bill, that bill never got to 218 votes, so the new bill brought people together from all corners of our conference, and it is a negotiated consensus bill that we're trying to make sure that we can get 218 votes for. That bill does contain provisions that are necessary to address the family separation issue, because even when the president issues the executive order he says he's going to do, there are still court cases and laws that limit the amount of time that children can be kept in a detention facility with their parents who are being charged with the misdemeanor crime of illegally entering the country. So he's going to be faced with the alternative of ultimately letting the whole family go or separating them. And when the family leaves, they go into the interior of the country, they're given a court date, and many of them never reappear. It's a big problem called catch and release.
Right. So I want to talk about the law that you are describing for those at home that may not understand what you're talking about. This is a law which, in fact, does limit the Trump administration. We're talking about the Flores Agreement, correct? Or the Flores Settlement. And basically, this was an agreement that was passed back in 1997, which limits the amount of time in which a family, or in this case, children who are not the criminals here, their parents are to be detained. So essentially, that ultimately was made that they could not be held onto or detained for more than 20 days, whether they are accompanied or not accompanied. So what Congress wants is for this Flores Agreement to then be overturned, and for an extended period of time to allow for them to go through the judicial process without being separated. Do I have that right?
That's correct. We want these prosecutions to be expedited. In some places they're occurring in as little as 7 days, but if they are, for example, then turning around and asking for political asylum in the United States, that's a process with a 600,000 case backlog, and so people have to be detained for a longer period of time. This bill will do 2 things. First of all, it will overturn the Flores decision and allow for children to remain with their parents, and secondly, it will provide the funding necessary to have more of these family detention facilities, so they can be held near the border and not allowed further into the country until the matter is resolved. If they are found to be lawfully admissible in the United States, then they will be released in the interior. If they're not, they'll be sent back home.
There is probably the biggest outcry of any issue right now in this country, protests all over the country over this. There's also a lot of false information out there that I want to set the record straight on when it comes to why this is happening in the first place. False information such as the White House saying that Democrats are to blame for an existing law which separates these families at the border. The fact is there is no current law which actually mandates charging all border crossers criminally. And the federal law criminalizing improper entry by aliens, in fact, does not require that these families be separated. So there is no law that states that you must separate a father and a mother with their child. Is that correct?
It is not correct in this respect. If they want to retain the children with the parents, they can only do so for a limited period of time.
Correct.
Based upon court decisions and a 1997 law.
Right.
So that needs to be changed, and we change it in this legislation.
All right. Well, then let's look forward to getting that passed. And of course, the president expected to sign that executive order any moment now. Real quick before I let you go, your thoughts, your opinion on this executive order the president is going to sign. Good idea or bad?
I'm pleased that he wants to make sure that children can be with their parents. But as I say, it's only a partial solution because very quickly they're going to find that they have to go back to the old catch and release, which, by the way, plagued the Obama administration. The Obama administration actually fought that court decision in court. And I went down to the border in McAllen, Texas, to the DHS detention facility, and they had children separated from their parents back then. It's not a new situation.
It was back in 2014. There was an influx of migrants coming in from Central America. The same thing happened in the past administration. But the idea was not to separate parents from their children. Congressman Bob Goodlatte, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Votes expected to come from the House floor tomorrow, but will any immigration bill make its way to the Senate? Chris Stirewalt joins us now for the analysis next. Plus, there's growing backlash against the president's Attorney General Sessions and Homeland Security Secretary as the White House faces criticism over its zero-tolerance immigration policy. Calling out Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen there as she dined out in Washington last night. It was at a Mexican restaurant. The secretary not acknowledging the demonstrators, but her spokesperson did later tweet the following. Secretary Nielsen encourages all, including this group, who want to see an immigration system that works, contributes to our economy, protects our security, and reflects our values, reach out to members and seek their support to close immigration loopholes that made our system a mess. Elena Treen is an associate news editor and reporter at Axios. Thank you so much for talking to us today. I mean, if you had to pick two cabinet members that are bearing the biggest brunt over this by carrying out the president's immigration plan, it's Homeland Security Chief Kirstjen Nielsen there, obviously, having dinner, and Attorney General Jeff Sessions. But really, it's Nielsen who has become the face of probably, you could say, one of the Trump administration's most controversial policies. The reason for this, obviously, the family separation, but the most recent reason for the outcry are for these tender age shelters, they call them, which they've basically been set up to house babies and toddlers separated from their parents. Can you explain what exactly is going on inside these tender age facilities?
Yes, I can. Well, so from what our reporting shows, there's 3 right now, and they're looking at opening a 4th in Houston in a shelter that was previously used for people who were displaced from Hurricane Harvey. But people who have been there, lawyers, doctors, they've described it as these really desolate playgrounds where children are crying and are really upset and frustrated with this experience and wondering where their families are. And it's a lot of people have been very emotional about this. And this is something that, in addition to the images we're seeing of children being ripped from their parents at the border, something that's really garnered a lot of attention from the media, from critics of this family separation policy.
The sad part is that these children have no say in the situation that they're in. Their parents have broken the law, but that does not make it right. And that's what a lot of critics are saying. Former First Lady Laura Bush, I'm sure you saw her compelling op-ed piece that appeared in the Washington Post this week. And she wrote about how people working at a children's shelter run by the U.S. Office of Refugee Resettlement are instructed not to pick up or touch children to comfort them. And she writes, imagine not being able to pick up a child who is not yet out of diapers. And that just ran chills up my spine, because when I went home to my 2-year-old, I picked him up.
Exactly.
I have no words.
Heartbreaking. It's so heartbreaking to see. And what's really upsetting with this, with these tender care shelters, is that these children are so young. They're at this age where researchers say they're very susceptible to long-term trauma from what is happening. And what we're also seeing is that the administration isn't exactly doing things or have things in place to minimize this care, essentially because everything's kind of going, we're seeing it all happen in real time.
Right.
They didn't expect, this influx of children.
Of course not.
So what they're seeing now is, they're not being able to talk to their families or to their parents. Their parents aren't being able to recommend to caregivers, advice for how to deal with their children,
Right.
When to put them to bed, what they can and can't eat. And it's going to affect them psychologically, what researchers
That's why we don't have
say.
orphanages anymore, because it was found orphanages were unhealthy. That's why people are put in homes or in daycare facilities where people are trained to take care of children. There is a fourth shelter that was expected to open in Houston sometime soon. I'm wondering if you think that could change after the president signs this executive order.
Well, it definitely could. I think all eyes right now are on what the president does. He did signal to pool reporters earlier today that he plans to sign this executive order that would look at going around that Flores settlement, which essentially says that children cannot be detained for more than 20 days, even if they are with their families. So if they do go around that and try to change that policy, what would happen is the children would be put with their families into these detention centers and then kind of wait there. The problem is that they're worried about this might turn back into catch and release. And from what our reporting has shown, the president at all measures does not want that to happen. He doesn't want them to be caught and then released again while they wait a hearing.
No, there needs to be a safe place for these families to stay together in order for them to go through the process, because when you come into this country illegally, obviously there has to be consequences. There just need to be humanitarian ones. Elena Triin, thank you very much for talking to us. Thank you.
Thank you.
As President Trump prepares to take action on immigration, some critics point to a pattern in his relations with Congress. So is the president forcing Republicans into an unwinnable situation?
We have a partnership under the Constitution. We have some authority. The president has some authority. We need to work together. Immigration, which has bedeviled us for 40 years, as you've said, I believe you're the president who can help us solve the immigration problem with your leadership.
All right. He will sign something today. He's talking about an executive order which would end the separation of children from parents at our southern border, after insisting only Congress could fix the problem. Well, some critics are pointing out this is not the first time the president has taken action, then called on lawmakers to step in. Caitlin Owens writes in Axios, quote, he decided to end the Affordable Care Act's cost-sharing subsidy payments. He ended DACA, which protected people who came to the United States illegally as children from deportation. Chris Tarwalt, Fox News political editor and the editor of Halftime Report, joins me now. Thank you so much, Chris, for talking to us. You got to give it to the president. He tries to trust Congress. He tries to trust politicians to actually get something done. And he gives them all this time. And then when they don't, he ends up stepping in. But is it a problem for the president to enforce an executive order on something like this? Or does he let the politicians hammer it out?
Well, to be fair, he is a politician.
Yes.
And he is a politician who does not like to feel the burn. He likes it, as every politician does, when the heat is on the other side, the other branch of government, the other party. This was a gambit at the White House. They believed, as they did, if you'll recall, the president's plan about dealing with Obamacare, let's let it crash, then stick the Democrats with the blame and say, we didn't have anything to do with this. It's their fault. This was the same approach as that, but carried out. The Republicans blocked the president on his effort to do that with Obamacare. This time he went ahead and did it. And as it turns out, or at least as it seems to be turning out, the Democrats are quite content to let the Republicans absolutely flail around on this one. And without the willingness of the White House, and here's what it comes down to. The willingness of the White House to endure the political pain of pursuing this strategy, of pursuing this policy, was what was forcing the discussion. If the White House is blinking, if the president is blinking and saying, okay, actually, it was a policy, it was ours, and we're undoing it, if he does that, that is going to take the pressure off Congress in a big way.
Okay, painful policy like this is also something, obviously, as every politician knows, a make or break. And we've got midterm elections right around the corner. The president, again, is punting to Congress to act on a key policy that has been the subject of a long-term stalemate. But this one obviously has generated probably the most anger from the American public. Do you believe the reason for today's announcement that we may be seeing this executive order come down any minute now may have more political pressure involved, considering we want people to vote a certain way come November?
Well, we want to see what's in this order. We don't know what sort of filigree they're going to put on this thing and what they're going to try to do. Are they going to go for a big gambit here to try to make some new executive authority? Are they going to retreat simply? What's their strategy here will have a lot to do with that. But I will tell you this, no issue divides the American people as sharply, painfully, and destructively as immigration. And both sides here know that, and they want to exploit it. The president wants to exploit it for his own good, and Democrats want to exploit it for their own good, because they know nothing's going to get base voters to the polls better than, faster than, and with more urgency than this topic.
I want to talk about how people will vote come November and how immigration plays a role here. According to an NBC News Wall Street Journal poll out just last week, 39% say they would be more likely to cast a ballot for a candidate who supports Donald Trump's policies on immigration and border security, while 49% say they would be less likely to back a candidate who supports Trump. So the issue of immigration certainly can cause candidates to either win or lose elections here. The question is, which party has more to lose if this separation between families and children isn't hammered out?
Look, the base voters here are already spoken for. So a lot of the people who are responding to that question, you couldn't change their votes no matter what. There's nothing you could do to pry them away from one party or the other. The question here is, and this is a serious concern for Republicans, there are dozens of districts, 75 or more districts around the country, that are these kind of suburban districts where there are a lot of moms voting. If what this, I don't know what you want to call it, the crisis, the self-created crisis, if the net effect here is to send more women, especially moms in the suburbs, away from Republicans and want them to, and leave them wanting to have a check on the administration, then this will have done harm.
All right, Chris Stirewalt, thank you for coming on. Hey, and before I let you go, I want to give you a shout out to your home state and wish you a happy West Virginia Day. Don't we have some special effects to sprinkle on, Chris Stirewalt? I heard we had confetti. No, we didn't want to mess up your hair. All right, Chris Stirewalt, thank you very much. Happy West Virginia Day. We're awaiting action from President Trump any minute now on family separations at the border, as we learn some children are being held more than 1,000 miles.
As passports to get into the country. So we have to work on that, too. It's a very complex issue. It has been going on. You shouldn't feel guilty, because it's been going on for many, many years, many decades. But we're going to solve that.
President Trump saying he will sign something ending a humanitarian crisis happening at the border right now after widespread outrage over separating small children from their parents. Meanwhile, here in New York City, Mayor Bill de Blasio is paying a visit to a shelter in Harlem. It's reportedly one of 10 New York City facilities, in fact, being used to house migrant children. And Brian Yanis is reporting live from East Harlem with more on the mayor's visit. Hi, Brian.
Hi, Julie. Well, that's right. We are waiting for Mayor Bill de Blasio to come out of the Cayuga Family Center here in East Harlem. We're expecting him to make some remarks. Governor Andrew Cuomo of New York says some 100 children, as many as 300 children, have been placed throughout 10 shelters here in the state of New York. They have traveled from the border, and these are children that have been separated from their parents at the border more than 1,000 miles away. Bill de Blasio, again, came in about a half hour ago into this center. He has said that he has no words for what this kind of act is in separating children from parents, and he has promised to do more about it. This is video that you're watching right now from Spectrum News New York 1. It shows 5 young girls being brought into the Cayuga Center here in East Harlem at 12:45 this morning. Cayuga is a foster center which places children with families, and a woman with these girls reportedly emphatically denied that they were girls being separated by their families, but an hour later, these same girls were escorted out of this building with their heads covered with a jacket. The CEO of Cayuga Centers tells Gothamist website that he and other shelters have been receiving unaccompanied minors, but he could not confirm whether or not his center was holding children that have been separated from their parents. Earlier, Governor Andrew Cuomo, speaking on another network, spoke about these 100 to 300 children that could be in his state.
These are not unaccompanied alien children. These are children you took from their parents' arms. And now they have a hodgepodge where they're looking for beds wherever they can.
Governor Andrew Cuomo also announcing, Julie, that he and the state of New York will be suing the Trump administration on behalf of these children that have been ripped away from their parents. He says they have constitutional rights that have clearly been violated. Julie.
Brian Yanis here in New York City. Thank you, Brian. So this issue of separating families at the border, if not resolved quickly, could have a major impact on the November midterm elections, especially in some hotly contested swing states. And Peter Doocy has more on that side of the story from Washington for us. Hi, Peter.
Julie, Republicans are trying to keep control of both houses of Congress in these midterms, and lawmakers on the Hill are feeling the heat after days of pressure to do something about laws that permit parents and children from being separated at the border.
I would say that none of this reflects well on Congress or the administration in terms of our inability to solve the problem.
The upper chamber's top Republican, Senator Mitch McConnell, says that nobody is going to be tarred by this crisis because they're going to come up with a solution. But his counterpart, Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer, says he's not interested in negotiating a new bill to stop these family separations because Congress doesn't have a good track record on immigration. So Schumer would rather just let it all play out. And the longer it does, the more opportunities rank and file Democrats have to criticize President Trump for not using executive authority to change the rules at the border. Earlier today, one of our crews did catch up with one of the Democrats' top surrogates for 2018, though, and he says this issue doesn't have him thinking about flipping seats.
We shouldn't be talking about that, honestly. This is a time we should not be engaging in politics. We should not be thinking about election consequences.
The big national issue of family separations is now trickling into state-level races, though. I spoke this afternoon with Beth Lindstrom, a Republican hoping to challenge Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren in the fall, and she indicated that talk about this issue and possible sanctuary cities up in Massachusetts is now coming to the campaign trail in New England. Julie.
All right, Peter Doocy, thank you so much. Let's bring in now Guy Benson, co-host of Benson and Harf, and J-Mo Green, former candidate for DNC chair. Both are Fox News contributors. All right, let's talk about this GOP compromise bill. It is merit-based visas and path to citizenship for Dreamers. That's part of it. Visas available to DACA-eligible immigrants. It also keeps families together at the border while parents go through the criminal proceedings. And you just got off the phone with somebody in Washington who has a little bit of an insight as to how this may go down tomorrow.
Yeah, so I spoke to a top House source about leadership's thinking on this. I would just stipulate that if I were a member of the House of Representatives, I would vote for the compromise bill. I think it's a sensible, good bill.
Okay.
However, leadership is looking at both of those votes tomorrow and are not confident that either one is going to pass. So if, in fact, as they suspect, both fail tomorrow, then the question becomes what happens next. And I think that there's an eye toward maybe looking at what the Senate's doing, which is a so-called clean or standalone bill dealing discreetly with the issue of family separations at the border. But that won't come to the floor or even up for a serious debate or vote prior to the other ones because they've made those promises to members. The Goodlatte bill and the compromise bill will come first. They're whipping votes, especially on the compromise bill, but not sounding too sanguine about getting to 218.
Okay, so if they don't get to 218, this whole thing just becomes a bigger mess. We have an executive order that could potentially be signed, though, within the hour by the president, which would end the separation of families and children, although that's not going to take effect right away. So then what is the solution? Is the Senate the one to have to pick up the dirty work after perhaps this does not get voted through, if leadership is telling some of your sources that it may not go?
Well, the Senate might be the option. I think what is clear to Democrats in the House is that neither of these bills actually fix the problem, and they're also trying to, kind of like mothers sneak in vegetables into different meals, they're trying to sneak in some really distasteful things that Democrats are not going to be up for. But what we're seeing here, Julie, is that Republicans are desperate to fix this issue. Donald Trump created a situation for them that is a lose-lose situation, looking at the November midterms and the opportunity to lose religious voters who are the base of the party, the opportunity to increase Democratic enthusiasm, which there was already an enthusiasm gap. Donald Trump has played into this, and so he's really positioned Republicans running in November in a bad place.
Democrats have been accused by the White House of being responsible for this whole family separation thing. They're pointing to the law. The law doesn't necessarily state that you have to separate the two. In years past, until this zero tolerance policy was pushed and enforced, these families who would bring in minors were treated civilly in civil situations, not criminally. So therefore, you wouldn't have the need to separate it. So it's a zero tolerance policy that has, in fact, separated this. This is a decision that was made by the White House.
That is true, and I think to blame it all on Democrats is a real stretch. However, the previous status quo, so let's say the president pauses zero tolerance or rescinds it, going back to the previous policy, which was catch and release, where you would come into the country, claim asylum, get released into the country with a court date, and many, many people would never show up for that court date.
Well, that doesn't work.
That's
I mean,
right.
you
That's
can't
broken.
obviously trust illegal immigrants to show up to court if you release them. I mean,
Right, so that's a broken system that needs to be addressed, which is why my hope, and I don't agree obviously with your characterizations of the Republican bills tomorrow in the House, if the Senate deals with this and then the House as well with a standalone bill, you have to do it in a way that would keep the families together with the resources to do so, but address that catch and release piece, which is an ongoing problem and really needs to be fixed. And Democrats should not say, we're not going to negotiate on legislation. If they get a clean, standalone bill on this, then it would be ridiculous to say, this is a horrible humanitarian tragedy, but we're not going to legislate on it, even though we are legislators. Someone should get that memo to Chuck Schumer.
Okay. Obviously, that message has backfired, and he is willing to sign an executive order. You have to give him that and hope that politicians in Washington play catch up now and come up with immigration reform that works for everyone.
I think he has surrounded himself with people like Stephen Miller, who have said, I want to strip babies away from their mothers and actually see that as something being positive.
We should see what's in the actual order itself. We don't know what's going to be in it. And maybe some of those measures that are going to be taken, they could have considered those before implementing zero tolerance.
We're going to be getting that any moment. He is planning on attending a Minnesota rally tonight. And before he leaves for Minnesota, he said that he will be signing this. So that should be coming down sometime in the next 20 minutes or so. Thank you both, Guy Benson and Jaymoo Green. Always great to see you both. Thank you.
Thing.
North Korea, another issue the president has been dealing with, and North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un, coming to an agreement with the White House on the return of remains from Americans killed in the Korean War. When will that transfer happen? We'll tell you. Plus, how China is responding to the latest concerns about a trade war after President Trump threatens a new wave of terror.
I've Trace Gallagher in for Shep. For days, President Trump said there was nothing he could do about immigrant families being separated at the border. Now the president says he'll sign an executive order to keep those families together. But he says he still wants Congress to pass a law, and the House getting ready to vote. That's coming up on Shepard Smith reporting.
North Korea now set to return the remains of up to 200 American service members killed in the Korean War. Fox News learning the transfer should happen within the next few days. This comes as Kim Jong-un leaves behind Beijing following a 2-day meeting with China's president. Joining us now, Noah Rothman, associate editor at Commentary Magazine. Kim Jong-un leaves Beijing now after Xi Jinping invited him for a third straight time. This visit has happened. Some experts are saying this potentially could show the United States that China's in control. What do you think?
Well, it certainly signals that China wants to be in control. They have signaled that they were a little disconcerted with the extent to which North Korea had taken the lead with bilateral negotiations with the United States. They like to perform an intermediary role there. So their concerns are pretty well represented. I am a little skeptical of the extent to which this concession, while welcome, amounts essentially to the surrender of more hostages. The tangible concession that is the giving up of hostages is good, it's welcome, but it does not get us anywhere closer to denuclearization. The agreement that we signed at that summit does not specify anything with regards to the extent to which they have a program, disclosures of their existing program, a timetable to verify the program. So we're pretty much back where we were. We're at confidence building measures, but the summit was supposed to be something much more concrete than confidence building measures.
Right. And South Korea would also like to know how North Korea is actually going to denuclearize, or if they actually will. They say they want more concrete plans in how they're going to do that. You know, Secretary Jim Mattis is going to be making his very first appearance since basically remaining relatively silent since the summit between Kim Jong-un and the president. Why do you believe the silence, first of all, behind the scenes coming from our defense secretary?
Well, from the reports that we read, the president's decision to put on the table exercises, or rather take them off the table, with our allies in South Korea came as a shock both to South Korea and the Pentagon. That's disconcerting, because if the president is going ahead and offering that kind of a concession without consulting with our allies first, it opens up some daylight between us and our allies and the Pentagon, and that's something that North Korea has traditionally sought and exploited.
Well, South Korea has always wanted to take these military exercises with the United States in order to send a message to North Korea. And North Korea still is very much a threat. Yes, things look much better on paper. You know, the president and Kim Jong-un have had their very first historic United States-North Korea summit. But let's not forget, it was just September, not so long ago, when they tested a hydrogen bomb. So the question is, was pulling those military exercises off the table a good idea? And was that Mattis's call? Who's in the driver's seat?
As far as we know, the president is in the driver's seat. He's dictating policy. The Pentagon is responding to what the commander-in-chief tells them to do, as they should. But is this part of a tangible plan? I am not sure. And what we know is that the summit is the biggest concession that we've offered, and it has not been reciprocal. We have shorn up the political position of Kim Jong-un at home, and they are publishing images of, for example, Kim Jong-un in a developed Asian country in Singapore, lit up bright lights at night for a country full of people who will never see anything like that. That tells me that this regime is feeling very secure about itself. It's not afraid of its people, and they are really well positioned now to move forward with negotiations with the United States on their terms.
Whether Mattis is calling the shot or the president, we will say this, and I'll leave it here because we have to go, but the latest polls are saying that the United States American public are happy with the way the president is handling North Korea. At least the majority are. In fact, they approve how he's handling North Korea more than they do his standing as president and his job as president.
No one wants to go back to the days of fire and fury, but I'm concerned that this might be the wrong course.
All right. Noah Rothman, thank you very much. Volvo opening its first American plant today. It's going to make cars here and ship them out. But could it? North Carolina, the Swedish automaker, saying it will build cars in the U.S., then export them to countries all over the world, including Sweden. Jeff Flock is in Ridgeville, South Carolina. And Jeff, there's been a lot of talk about tariffs. Is Volvo worried about a trade war?
Everyone in the auto industry is worried about a trade war, Julie, because they have based their strategy on being able to build cars here in the U.S. and ship them elsewhere, as well as make cars elsewhere and ship them here. You're getting your first live look, by the way, inside this Volvo assembly plant here in Ridgeville. In terms of the vehicle that's made here, the S60 just got revealed today. It's a sedan. They will make it only here eventually, and then they'll ship it to China, and then they'll ship it to, as we said, Sweden, which is kind of crazy. It becomes just the latest foreign automaker to make cars here in the U.S. A lot of big companies already do. Toyota makes a whole lot of cars here. And they say, quite clearly, you put tariffs on cars going either way, and essentially you put a tax on those cars. Listen to the CEO of Volvo today to us on Fox Business Network.
That would mean that we, of course, have to charge more to our consumers, so they would be the ones paying 25% duties, 25% more expensive cars. So that is not good. We believe in an open trade system. Some models you can import, other models you can export.
The message is, quite simply, Julie, less tariffs, not more tariffs. Julie.
All right, so then why would Volvo build cars in America and then export them to Sweden?
I know it sounds crazy, doesn't it? But What their strategy is, as I said, is a global company. They want to make cars where they sell cars, but they also want to centralize production. So this vehicle, this is the S60, they'll only make it here. Makes it much simpler rather than try to make it at multiple plants around different countries. Going to be cheaper, and so it makes sense. The only problem is you get big tariffs one way or the other, costs more money, messes up the whole situation.
All right, Jeff Flock in Ridgeville, South Carolina, thank you very much. A father and son going viral with an incredible Father's Day portrait, a photograph 20 years in the making.